At the end of the third and final presidential debate, Ben Schiffer, the moderator, left us with the following quote. In the words of my mother, go vote. It makes you feel big and strong. Voting is a fundamental right of any citizen of any democratic country. In fact, I believe it's a citizen's fundamental obligation to take part in the privilege to be able to decide the ruling party to govern the nation, which they are a citizen within. Voting, however, in the United States has been rather contentious over the past few hundred years. It has by no means been an easy affair. Federal and state laws govern voting eligibility, with citizenship being the minimum requirement governed on a federal basis. But in the absence of a federal law or constitutional amendment, each state is given considerable discretion to establish qualifications for suffrage and candidacy within its own jurisdiction. To explain that in short, it means that if there are no laws really abiding that explain how one should vote, then a state could come up with some form of reform that says X person can vote for this reason or X person cannot vote for this reason. Since the formation of the United States, the eligibility to be able to vote has changed dramatically. As aforementioned, it started with white land-owning men who could be taxed. That's the main part. If we're getting your money, you can vote whether we can rule you. Then it expanded, and the voting base today is 219 million eligible Americans. Particularly, over the course of history, amendments have been made to widen and expand this voter base in order to get and encapsulate a large majority, in order to get more voters deciding the fate of the governance of this nation. The 15th Amendment is particularly poignant because it states the right of the citizen of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, on account of color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, why is this important? Of course, times have changed, and it's not just white land-owning men who are voting today, as we've seen. But under our noses, under the guise of voter fraud and under a fairer process, the Republican Party is taking steps to disenfranchise and suppress voters within the United States. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking perhaps there is voting fraud, who can't just take 2 ballots and just fill them out and dump them off, and there you have it, 2 votes. Well, in the 1960s, in Chicago, in the John F. Kennedy election, this actually became rather rampant. A considerable number of zombies managed to saunter over to polling stations. It was found that a large number of dead voters voted for JFK. Who would have thought he was popular with the deceased? This was all funded by the Richard Daley, not so much funded, but pushed by the Richard Daley election machine. However, today times have changed considerably. It's quite hard to find instances of voter fraud anywhere. The Brennan Center at the NYU Law School, at the forefront of research and investigations into voter fraud and voter fairness, has found that in Washington state, the incidence of voter fraud was 0.0009%. And in 2004, in the hotly contested state of Ohio, it was found to be 0.00004% voter fraud, which actually means that if you're voting, you're more likely to get struck by lightning and killed before you become a perpetrator of voter fraud. The National Weather Center has stated that this fact is in fact pretty accurate, and therefore it's more likely we're all struck down dead by lightning than we're all voter frauds. So, how does the Republican Party aim to prevent voter fraud? As aforementioned, with voter identification. Now, why is this a particular problem, even though it may disenfranchise 11% of voters? It's not because it's disenfranchising 11%, if you want to say law of averages, it's 11% of average. Who cares? Just less voters, the result should be the same. It's the fact that it's targeting specific demographics with the aim of skewing the outcome of the election results. For instance, those without driver's licenses would probably be inner-city ethnic minorities of a lower socioeconomic status. Those without a passport might be immigrants who didn't obtain birth certificates or bring them over when they came over the border. Or it could just be someone who doesn't like traveling. There are so many various instances where people don't have the accurate photo ID, and it's not all photo ID. When Mitt Romney was pressed and asked, what photo ID would you require in Pennsylvania? We'd like voter ID laws. He said, I don't know. a man who wants to lead the country is trying to make laws to skew results that he doesn't even know how they work. In order to fully illustrate the Republicans' desire to skew these results, House Majority Leader Mike Turzai is quoted as saying in June 2012, "Because the law has been passed in Pennsylvania requiring photo ID, it has allowed the Republican Party to win the state of Pennsylvania." Luckily, in October of 2012, the Supreme Court found that because voters were not given a long enough time to obtain the necessary photo identification, it would not be fair to enforce this law. But you could say, fair enough, they want to stop voter fraud. Okay, I give them that. How else are they trying to disenfranchise voters? Well, a voting reform has been the extension of the early voting period, which works well for people with not really flexible work schedules, or those who are in communities such as a gospel church who might organise a bus that takes the whole community to vote together. Now, the Republican Party in 2008 was quite behind this. It was a very widely supported bipartisan form of earlier reform. But now in 2012, in the state of Florida, which was hotly contested as we saw, they tried to limit the early voting period from 14 days to 8 days. In Ohio, they tried to slash it by 2/3 from 35 days to 11 days. Now, why would this be done? This is because it's been found from an Ohio voter advocacy group that 50% of early in-person voters were African Americans, 90+% of which were voting Democratically, compared to 25% of in-person voters being African American on election day. To further prove this point, Jeff Greer, the former, now disgraced Republican representative in the state of Florida, is quoted as saying in a Palm Beach Post interview, "Well, the real reason we tried to cut down early voting requirements was simply because we just didn't want them voting Democratic. We thought if we cut immigrants, cut African Americans, we'd get the result we desired." Now, the man probably is trying to get back at the party that's fallen away from his graces, but at the same time, his comments are supported by other members of the Republican Party working within Florida. But what are the effects of other such disenfranchisements? You've got the flyers being passed out in states which in English say the deadline for voting is November 6th, but in Spanish say it's November 8th. You've also got lists of convicted felons, 50,000 names long, with only 30,000 real convicted felons on there, 20,000 of which are just average citizens. Interestingly enough, 50% of those 20,000 were African Americans, but only 15% of the individuals' names on that list were African Americans. So what are the effects of these voter reforms? It's, in essence, it's an attack on the rights of the citizens of the United States. Everybody in this room who can vote. The interesting part is, you could say, well, immigrants shouldn't be allowed to vote. You know, they've only become citizens recently. That is an issue of immigration reform. The issue here is the usurpment of the privileges and, as I said, the fundamental obligation of the citizens who take part in the election and in the election that decides the governance of this nation. So what would be the solution to this problem? Well, you could leave it status quo. Things are going pretty well. Not many people are getting struck by lightning and killed. There's not too much fraud, not too many zombies are making it to support JFK. Maybe he's making it to voting polls though. Or, what you could do is actually institute photo identification. But you make it governed at a state level, kind of like the DMV, and you institute another branch. You don't want broader government, as we heard numerous times in the debate. We want something simple and digestible, and these cards could be swiped. It means you actually limit the chance of voter fraud, and also these cards could be kept over that citizen's lifespan. So over 4 years, you have your chance to apply. It'll probably cost $10 to $20, maybe even $30, across the 219 million individuals allowed to vote. That's anywhere from about $4 to $6 billion. But if you levy a tax of $10 to $20 over someone's period of their entire lifetime, you're talking cents. If someone doesn't want a Snickers bar for a day, they get to vote. I think it's fair. So, we can also expand the early voting period in order to let every man, woman, child, any race, any religion, any demographic, any socioeconomic status vote. Because not everybody has the privileges of the white land-owning male who gets to vote whatever day of the week because they decide their own working hours. Interestingly enough, a great comment in November 6th Forbes article was India, the world's largest democracy, takes their whole election process over weeks. Only in the United States is the average 19 days for the early voting period, and now you've got Republicans trying to slash it to 10. You're saying you're the largest powerhouse in America. You guys define the rest of the world. And you're trying to squeeze people in the doorway, leaving lines around the corner, saying, well, why should people vote? You know, I only want the Republican Party to win because maybe my tax would be better. But that is not democracy, which this country was founded upon. So the importance here is to value the structures and statutes upon a great nation's building and the foundations. If you want people to vote and you want democracy, you make it fair. If you want people to smile and take a picture, you make it accessible. If you want people to be able to escape their jobs and vote and choose who they want to govern the country, you let them. And I think it's very mysterious that a party likes to push voter fraud, because I don't really know anyone who's been struck by that. Thank you very much.